dark screen, the sound of a train whistle pierces the silence, followed by the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks. A faint scream echoes, then fades. The screen flashes to a luxurious 1920s train, the Riviera Express, speeding through the French night. Aboard the opulent Riviera Express, a scream shatters the night. Clara Grayson is found dead, stabbed in a locked compartment, her diamond brooch vanished. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, steps into a web of secrets. Was it the Russian countess, hiding a scandal, the desperate industrialist, drowning in debt, or the silent Englishman, watching from the shadows? Quick cuts. Poirot examining a scratched window, a crumpled note, a hidden panel, faces of passengers. Guarded flash by. As the train races toward Lyon, Poirot uncovers a deadly game of motives: betrayal, greed, pride. A confrontation looms, but the killer is closer than anyone dares to think. Screen cuts to Poirot in the dining car, pointing at a shadowy figure, passengers gasping. The train's whistle screams again. Who struck in the dark? The truth will shock you. But will Poirot unmask the murderer before the journey's end? Screen fades to black, the train's clatter slowing to a heartbeat. Text appears. Death on the Riviera Express. Unravel the mystery. Chapter 1. The train departs. The Riviera Express stood resplendent under the pale sunlight of a late September morning, its sleek blue carriages gleaming like a string of polished gems along the platform at Calais. The air carried the crisp tang of the sea, mingling with the faint aroma of engine oil and the perfume of departing travelers. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored charcoal suit, adjusted his Homburg hat with a precise flick of his wrist and surveyed the scene with the keen eye of a man who missed nothing. His mustache, meticulously waxed, quivered slightly as he inhaled the atmosphere of anticipation that enveloped the station. The journey to Nice aboard this luxurious train promised elegance and repose, a prospect that appealed immensely to Poirot's love of order and comfort. Yet, as he stepped aboard, a subtle unease stirred within him, a whisper of intuition, perhaps, that this journey would be anything but tranquil. The platform bustled with activity. Porters darted about, their arms laden with trunks and valises, while passengers exchanged farewells in a medley of languages: French, English, Russian, and the occasional burst of Italian. Poirot's small, polished shoes clicked against the metal steps as he ascended into the first-class carriage, his ticket clutched in a gloved hand. The conductor, a wiry Frenchman named Monsieur Fournier, greeted him with a deferential bow. "Monsieur Poirot, Bonvenue, aboard," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with the fatigue of a man accustomed to long hours. Poirot nodded graciously, his green eyes scanning the conductor's face for a moment before he proceeded to his compartment. The interior of the Riviera Express was a marvel of Art Deco splendor. Polished mahogany paneling lined the corridors, reflecting the soft glow of brass sconces. The carpets, a deep burgundy, muffled the footsteps of passengers as they moved to their compartments. Poirot's own compartment, number 7, was a model of compact elegance, a plush velvet seat, a fold-down table of inlaid wood, and a narrow bed draped in crisp linens. A small vase of fresh violets adorned the table, their scent a delicate counterpoint to the richness of the surroundings. Poirot placed his valise on the rack, adjusted the angle of his hat in the mirror, and settled onto the seat, his hands folded neatly over his cane. The train's whistle sounded, a shrill cry that cut through the clamor of the platform, and with a gentle lurch, The Riviera Express began its journey southward. As the train gathered speed, Poirot's attention turned to his fellow passengers. He had always believed that the study of human nature was as essential to his craft as the examination of physical evidence. The Riviera Express, with its cosmopolitan clientele, offered a rich tapestry of characters to observe. From his vantage point in the corridor, where he lingered under the pretense of admiring the view, Poirot noted the comings and goings of those in the first-class carriage. Each passenger, he knew, carried a story, and it was his gift to discern which stories concealed secrets. Among the first to catch his eye was a Russian countess, Madame Irina Volkov, whose elegance was as striking as it was calculated. She swept into the corridor, her fur stole trailing behind her like a royal train, her dark eyes darting about with a mixture of hauteur and unease. Her jewelry pearls at her throat, diamonds at her ears, sparkled in the lamplight, and her movements were those of a woman accustomed to being watched. Yet Poirot noticed the way her fingers twisted the pearls, a nervous habit that betrayed an inner disquiet. A woman with a past, he murmured to himself, filing the observation away. Next came an American couple, Mr. Harold Grayson and his young wife, Clara. Grayson was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered and loud-voiced, with the brash confidence of a self-made industrialist. His suit, though expensive, was ill-fitting, as if he had not yet grown accustomed to wealth. Clara, by contrast, was delicate and pale, her blonde hair pinned in a simple chignon. She clung to her husband's arm, her eyes downcast, and Poirot detected a tremor in her hand as she adjusted her shawl. A marriage not entirely harmonious, he noted, observing the way Grayson's booming laugh seemed to make Clara flinch. A retired British colonel, Sir Basil Warrender, strode past with military precision, his moustache as formidable as Poirot's own. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp, and he carried a leather-bound book under one arm, a volume of military history, Poirot surmised. Accompanying him was his sister, Miss Evelyn Warrender, a woman of middle age, whose angular features and pinched mouth suggested a disposition both critical and unyielding. She wore a sensible tweed suit, and her voice, when she spoke to her brother, was sharp with impatience. "Really, Basil, must you dawdle?" she snapped, and Poirot's lips twitched in amusement. Siblings, he thought, often revealed more in their quarrels than in their courtesies. A French novelist, Madame Giselle Dubois, added a touch of theatricality to the scene. Her auburn hair was swept into an elaborate updo, and her silk dress rustled as she moved, her gestures broad and expressive. She paused to converse with Fournier, her laughter ringing like a bell, and Poirot overheard her mention inspiration for her next novel. "The train, monsieur, it is a microcosm of life," she declared, and Poirot wondered if her flair for drama extended beyond the page. The final passenger to draw his attention was a quiet Englishman, Mr. John Marlowe, whose unassuming appearance belied a certain intensity. He was tall and lean, with neatly combed brown hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. He carried a small notebook, which he tucked into his pocket when he noticed Poirot's gaze. His manner was polite but distant, and when Poirot offered a courteous nod, Marlowe returned it with the barest incline of his head. A man who observes, Poirot thought, but does not wish to be observed. The train sped through the French countryside, fields of golden wheat and vineyards flashing past the windows. Poirot returned to his compartment, where he opened a slim volume of Balzac, intending to pass the time in literary contemplation, but his mind wandered, drawn back to the passengers. Each, he sensed, carried a burden, a secret, a fear, a motive. The Riviera Express, for all its luxury, was a stage, and Poirot felt the curtain rising on a drama yet to unfold. As the afternoon waned, the dining car beckoned. Poirot made his way there, his cane tapping lightly on the carpet. The car was a vision of opulence. White linen tablecloths, crystal glassware, and silver cutlery gleamed under chandeliers. The passengers were already gathering, their voices a low hum over the clink of glasses. Poirot took a seat near the window, where he could observe without being conspicuous. A waiter, impeccable in his white jacket, presented a menu, and Poirot selected a light consomme and a glass of Chablis, his tastes as refined as his methods. The Countess, Madame Volkoff, sat alone at a table, her fur stole draped over the chair. She sipped champagne, her eyes darting to the door each time it opened. Poirot noted her tension, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Was she expecting someone, or fearing their arrival? He made a mental note to inquire further. The Graysons occupied a table nearby, Harold's voice carrying across the car as he recounted a business triumph in Chicago. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes fixed on her plate. Poirot observed the way she pushed her food about, eating little, and the way Harold's hand rested possessively on hers. A marriage of convenience, perhaps, or one strained by unspoken resentments. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn Warrender sat opposite each other, their conversation clipped and formal. Poirot caught fragments of their talks, something about a family estate and financial difficulties. Evelyn's tone was sharp, accusing, while Basil's responses were gruff and defensive. "You've mismanaged everything, Basil," Evelyn said, her voice low but cutting. Poirot's ears pricked up. Financial strain, he knew, often led to desperate acts. Madame Dubois, ever the performer, held court at a table with several minor passengers, tourists, and businessmen who hung on her every word. She spoke of her latest novel, A Tale of Passion and Betrayal, and Poirot wondered if her stories drew from life as much as from imagination. Her laughter was infectious, but her eyes, when they met Poirot's, held a glint of calculation. John Marlowe dined alone, his notebook open beside his plate. He jotted occasional notes, his pen moving swiftly, and Poirot speculated on their content. A diary, a record of observations, or something more sinister. Marlowe's solitude intrigued Poirot, for it suggested a man who preferred his own compania, had reason to avoid others. As the meal concluded, Poirot lingered over his coffee, savouring the aroma and the opportunity to observe. The passengers, he noted, were a microcosm of society. Wealth, ambition, pride, and secrets intertwined. The Riviera Express, with its confined elegance, was a perfect crucible for human nature. Poirot's intuition, that faint stirring he had felt upon boarding, grew stronger. Something was amiss, though he could not yet name it. The train's rhythm changed subtly, a slight slowing as it approached a tunnel. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the dining car was plunged into semi-darkness. A gasp rose from one of the table's Clara Grayson. Poirot saw, her hand pressed to her chest. Harold patted her arm, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "It's just a tunnel, darling," he said, but Clara's eyes were wide, her breath uneven. Poirot filed the moment away, sensing her fear was not of the dark but of something or someone else. The lights returned, and the passengers resumed their conversations, but Poirot's mind was at work. He recalled a case from years past, aboard another train, where the confines of a journey had unmasked a killer. The Riviera Express, he suspected, held its own secrets, waiting to be uncovered by his little grey cells. As evening fell, the passengers began to retire to their compartments. Poirot lingered in the corridor, ostensibly to admire the moonlit landscape, but in truth to continue his observations. Madame Volkov passed him, her fur stole brushing his arm, and offered a brittle smile. "A beautiful night, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her accent heavy. Poirot bowed, noting the faint tremor in her voice. "Indeed, madame," he replied, "but beauty often conceals complexity." She paused, her eyes narrowing, then continued. On her way, Poirot watched her go, his mind turning over the possibilities. A woman of her stature, he knew, did not travel alone without reason. Was she fleeing something, or pursuing it? The Graysons were next, Harold guiding Clara with a hand. On her elbow, she seemed reluctant, her steps hesitant, and Poirot caught a whispered exchange. "I don't want to be alone tonight," Clara murmured, her voice barely audible. Harold's response was curt. "Nonsense, Clara, you'll be fine." Poirot's mustache twitched. A husband, dismissive of his wife's fears, was a detail worth noting. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn passed without a word, their faces set in mutual displeasure. Madame Dubois, trailing a cloud of perfume, offered Poirot a theatrical wave. "Bonne nuit, Monsieur Poirot. May your dreams be as intriguing as your reputation," she called, and Poirot inclined his head, amused by her flair. John Marlowe was the last to pass, his notebook now tucked away. He met Poirot's gaze briefly, his expression unreadable, and murmured a polite good night. Poirot watched him disappear into his compartment, number 8, directly adjacent to Poirot's own. A convenient proximity, Poirot thought, for observation, for mischief. Returning to his compartment, Poirot prepared for bed with his usual precision. He hung his suit in the small wardrobe, polished his shoes with a cloth, and arranged his toiletries on the table. The violets, still fresh, lent a calming scent to the air. As he lay down, the train's gentle rocking lulled him, but sleep did not come easily. His mind was too active, turning over the faces, the gestures, the words of his fellow passengers. Each, he knew, was a piece of a puzzle, and though the picture was not yet clear, he felt certain it would soon take shape. The train plunged into another tunnel, the darkness enveloping the carriage. Poirot lay still, listening to the clatter of the wheels, the faint creak of the woodwork, the distant murmur of voices. Somewhere among these passengers was a story waiting to unfold, a story of passion, greed, or vengeance, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, would be ready to meet it. The night deepened, and the Riviera Express sped on, carrying its secrets toward the sunlit shores of the Mediterranean. Chapter 2. A cry in the night. The Riviera Express thundered through the French night, its wheels singing a relentless rhythm against the tracks. Hercule Poirot, nestled in the crisp linens of his first-class compartment, had just drifted into a light sleep when a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was a sound of raw terror, sharp and fleeting, swallowed almost instantly by the train's ceaseless clatter. Poirot's eyes snapped open, his senses alert. He lay still for a moment, his heart steady but his mind racing, as he pinpointed the sound's origins, somewhere along the first-class sleeping car, not far from his own compartment. With the precision of habit, he donned his silk dressing gown, slipped his feet into polished slippers, and seized his cane, its ebony handle cool against his palm. The little grey cells, as he called them, were already stirring. sensing the prelude to a mystery. Stepping into the corridor, Poirot found it dimly lit, the brass sconces casting long shadows on the mahogany walls. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint musk of perfume lingering from the evening's passage of passengers. Monsieur Fournier, the conductor, stood a few paces away. Outside compartment number 5, his face, usually composed, was pale, his eyes wide with alarm. His hands trembled as he fumbled with a ring of keys. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the train's rumble. "It is terrible. Madame Grayson is dead." Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his heightened attention. "Dead, you say? How?" he asked, his tone calm but insistent. "Stabbed, monsieur," Fournier replied, his voice breaking. "In her compartment. I heard the scream and came at once, but the door was locked." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Show me," he commanded, and Fournier, with a nervous nod, unlocked the door to compartment 5. The scene within was one of stark tragedy. Clara Grayson lay upon her bed, her delicate frame still, her nightgown stained with a vivid crimson bloom across her chest. A single, precise wound marked the point of entry, just below her collarbone. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the ceiling, and her pale hands were clutched as if in a final, futile grasp at life. The compartment was otherwise undisturbed, the bedclothes barely rumpled, the small table clear except for a glass of water, the window firmly shut. No weapon was visible, and the door, as Fournier had said, had been locked from the inside. Poirot's eyes swept the room, cataloguing every detail with the meticulousness of a watchmaker. The window's latch was secure, its frame unmarred except for a faint scratch, barely noticeable, near the lower edge. The lock on the door showed no signs of tampering, its mechanism smooth and intact. The air held a faint metallic temps, mingling with the lingering scent of Clara's perfume jasmine, Poirot noted, with a hint of rose. He knelt beside the bed, his gloved fingers hovering over the wound but not touching it. "A single thrust," he murmured, delivered with precision. This was no act of passion, but of calculation. The corridor began to fill with the murmur of voices as other passengers, roused by the scream, gathered outside. Poirot stepped back, allowing Fournier to cover Clara's body with a sheet. The conductor's hands shook as he did so, and Poirot placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Courage, Monsieur Fournier," he said softly. "We must proceed with order and method. Who was first to arrive after the scream?" Fournier swallowed hard. "I was, monsieur. I was in the service car when I heard it. I ran at once, but the door was locked, and I had to fetch my key. By the time I entered, Madame Grayson was, as you see." Poirot nodded, his mind already forming a timeline. "And you saw no one else in the corridor?" "No, monsieur. The corridor was empty. I swear it." The passengers, now clustered in the narrow space, pressed forward, their faces a gallery of shock, curiosity, and suspicion. Madame Irina Volkov, the Russian countess, stood at the forefront. Her fur stole clutched tightly around her shoulders. Her dark eyes were wide, her breath coming in short gasps that seemed almost theatrical. "Mon Dieu," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "Who could do such a thing?" Poirot noted the way her gaze flickered toward the compartment, as if seeking something or someone within. Harold Grayson, Clara's husband, pushed through the crowd, his face ashen. "Clara," he cried, attempting to enter, but Poirot barred his way with a gentle but firm hand. "Monsieur Grayson, I regret, But you must not disturb the scene, Poirot said. Grayson's eyes, red-rimmed, met Poirot's, and for a moment, raw grief seemed to overwhelm him. He staggered back, supported by Sir Basil Warrendor, whose military bearing remained rigid despite the circumstances. Sir Basil's sister, Miss Evelyn Warrender, stood beside him, her lips pursed in disapproval. "This is outrageous," she muttered, her voice sharp. "A woman murdered on a train of this caliber. What sort of security do they provide?" Her eyes darted to Fournier, who flinched under her glare. Madame Giselle Dubois, the French novelist, hovered at the edge of the group, her auburn hair slightly dishevelled, as if she had been roused from writing rather than sleep. She clutched a notebook to her chest, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of horror and fascination. "It is like something from one of my novels," she said, almost to herself, and Poirot's eyebrow rose slightly. "An opportunist, perhaps, or merely a woman, captivated by drama." John Marlowe, the quiet Englishman, stood apart, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He met Poirot's gaze briefly, then looked away, as if reluctant to engage. Poirot noted his stillness, the way he seemed to observe without reacting, a man accustomed to watching, perhaps, rather than acting. Poirot turned to Fournier. "Monsieur, seal this compartment. No one is to enter until we reach the next station, where the authorities must be informed. In the meantime, I shall make inquiries." Fournier nodded, his relief palpable at having a figure of authority take charge. Poirot, though not officially engaged, felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him. A murder on the Riviera Express was a challenge to his sense of justice, and he would not rest until the truth was uncovered. He began with the passengers, addressing them collectively. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and commanding, "a tragedy has occurred. Madame Grayson has been taken from us, and it is my intention to discover how and why. I ask for your cooperation. Please return to your compartments, and I shall speak with each of you in turn." The passengers dispersed reluctantly, their whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Poirot remained in the corridor, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. A locked compartment, a single wound, no weapon, and a scream that had woken half the carriagette. No one had seen the killer. It was, he thought, a problem worthy of Hercule Poirot. He began with Harold Grayson, who had retreated to his own compartment, number 6, adjacent to Clara's. Grayson sat heavily on the edge of his bed, his broad shoulders slumped, his hands clasped tightly together. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "Clara, she was everything to me." Poirot sat opposite, his posture erect, his eyes kind but probing. "Monsieur Grayson, my deepest sympathies. But I must ask, why did you and Madame Grayson occupy separate compartments?" Grayson's face flushed, though whether from grief or discomfort, Poirot could not yet tell. "Clara preferred it," he said. "She said she needed space to think. She was delicate, you know, nervous sometimes. I thought it was just her way. And last night," Poirot pressed, "when did you last see her?" Grayson hesitated, his fingers tightening. "After dinner, about 10 o'clock. We said good night in the corridor. She seemed preoccupied, but she wouldn't say why. I went to my compartment and read for a while before sleeping." Poirot nodded, noting the hesitation. "And you heard nothing? No scream, no footsteps?" "Nothing," Grayson said firmly, though his eyes darted to the side. "I sleep soundly, Monsieur Poirot. The train's noise masks everything. Poirot thanked him and moved on to Madame Volkov, whose compartment was number 3. She received him with a regal air. Seated on her velvet chair, her fur stole draped across her lap. "This is a horror, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her Russian accent thick. "I was walking in the corridor last night, unable to sleep, but I saw nothing, heard nothing until that terrible scream." "What time was your walk, madame?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but insistent. She waved a hand vaguely. "Perhaps midnight, perhaps later. I do not keep a clock in my heart." Her smile was brittle, and Poirot sensed she was withholding something. He pressed her gently, but she remained elusive, insisting she had returned to her compartment and slept until the scream woke her. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn warned her. In compartments 9 and 10 offered a joint alibi. "We were in the dining car, playing cards," Sir Basil said gruffly. "Evelyn and I often stay up late. We returned to our compartments around 1 o'clock. Miss Evelyn nodded, her expression sour. "We heard nothing unusual. The train is noisy, and we were absorbed in our game." Her tone suggested she found the entire affair an inconvenience, and Poirot noted her lack of sympathy. Madame Dubois, in compartment 4, was more forthcoming, though her account was tinged with melodrama. "I was writing, Monsieur Poirot," she said, gesturing to her notebook. "The muse visits at odd hours. But I did hear something, a muffled argument, perhaps from the direction of Madame Grayson's compartment. It was brief, and I thought little of it until now." Poirot's interest piqued. "An argument? Between whom?" She shrugged, her eyes gleaming. "A man and a woman, I think." The voices were low, but there was passion. I could not make out the words. John Marlowe, in compartment 8, was the least cooperative. "I was asleep," he said simply, his hands still in his pockets. "I heard the scream, but by the time I stepped into the corridor, others were already there." His brevity was frustrating, but Poirot sensed truth in his reserve. A man who spoke little often had much to hide. As Poirot returned to his own compartment, the train's rhythm seemed to mock his efforts, its steady beat a reminder of the fleeting time before the next station. The locked compartment, the scratch on the window, the missing weapon all pointed to a killer who was both bold and meticulous. And yet, Poirot thought, the human heart was never so tidy. Somewhere, in the glances, the hesitations, the half-truths of these passengers, lay the key to Clara Grayson's death. He sat at his small table. The violets sent a faint comfort, and began to sketch a mental map of the carriage, the passengers, and their stories. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot knew that the truth, like the Riviera Express, would not stop until it reached its destination. Chapter 3. The locked compartment. The Riviera Express hurtled through the pre-dawn darkness, its wheels a relentless metronome against the tracks. Within the confines of the first-class carriage, the air was thick with unease. The tragedy of Clara Grayson's death casting a pall over the luxurious surroundings. Hercule Poirot stood in the corridor outside the sealed compartment number 5, his small frame erect, his green eyes sharp as they surveyed the scene. The scream that had pierced the night lingered in his memory, a stark reminder of the violence that had unfolded. Now, with the passengers confined to their compartments and Monsieur Fournier hovering anxiously nearby, Poirot turned his attention to the puzzle that lay at the heart of the mystery. The locked compartment, the door to Clara's compartment. Now guarded by Fournier's watchful eye, was a heavy slab of mahogany, its brass fittings gleaming faintly in the dim light of the corridor. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the edge of the lock, a sturdy mechanism designed for security, not decoration. No signs of forcing, he murmured, his moustache twitching as he bent to examine the keyhole. The metal was unblemished, the locks, tumblers intact. He straightened, his gaze shifting to the window, which remained firmly shut, its latch undisturbed save for the faint scratch he had noted earlier. The scratch, barely a hair's breadth, ran vertically along the frame, suggesting a tool perhaps. A knife or a wire had been used to pry it open, yet the window's position, high above the rushing tracks, made escape improbable. The drop was sheer, the speed of the train formidable. A curious detail, Poirot said softly, but not, I think, the solution. Fournier, wringing his hands, ventured a question. Monsieur Poirot, how could anyone enter or leave? The door was locked, the window closed. It is impossible, Nan. Poirot's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. Impossible, monsieur. Fournier, none. The impossible is merely that which has not yet been explained. We shall find the method, and in it, the murderer. With Fournier's permission, Poirot re-entered the compartment, taking care not to disturb the scene. Clara Grayson's body, now covered with a sheet, lay as it had been found, the crimson stain seeping through the fabric, a grim reminder of her fate. The compartment was a mirror of Poirot's own, compact, elegant, with a fold-down table, a velvet seat, and a narrow bed. The table held only the glass of water, its surface undisturbed. Poirot's gaze lingered on the walls, the panels of polished wood that concealed the train's inner workings. He tapped lightly on one, then another, listening for variations. In sound, a faint hollow note near the head of the bed caught his attention, but a closer inspection revealed no hidden catch or seam. Interesting, he murmured, filing the observation away. He turned to the window again, opening it with care. The rush of cold night air filled the compartment, carrying the scent of coal and earth. Leaning out, Poirot studied the exterior. Frame. The scratch was clearer in the moonlight, a deliberate mark, but the ledge outside was narrow, barely wide enough for a foothold. A distraction, perhaps, he said, closing the window. The murderer wishes us to look here, but the truth lies elsewhere. Fournier, hovering at the door, cleared his throat. Monsieur, the other passengers, they grow restless. They demand answers, and the police will be waiting at Lyon. Poirot nodded, his mind already turning to the interviews he must conduct. Then let us proceed with method. I shall speak to each passenger again, but first, tell me, Monsieur Fournier, has the train stopped at any point since we left Calais? Fournier shook his head emphatically. Nan, monsieur, we have been in motion all night. The next stop is Lyon, in 2 hours. Bon, Poirot said. Then our murderer is still among us. Let us see what they reveal. He began with Harold Grayson, whose grief seemed to have hardened into a sullen agitation. In his compartment, Grayson paced like a caged animal, his broad frame filling the small space. I don't understand it, Poirot, he said, his American accent thick with frustration. Who would want to kill Clara? She was an angel. Poirot sat calmly, his cane resting across his knees. Monsieur Grayson, tell me of your wife's habits. Did she often lock her door at night? Grayson paused, his hands clenching. Always. She was nervous, especially on trains. Said she didn't like strangers about. I checked the door myself. After she went in locked tight, and you heard nothing unusual. No knock, No voices. Grayson shook his head, but his eyes flickered. A momentary lapse that Poirot noted. Nothing. I told you I was asleep. Poirot inclined his head, his expression neutral. And Madame Grayson's possessions, her jewelry, perhaps, was anything of value in her compartment? Grayson's face darkened. She had a diamond brooch, a gift from me, worth a fortune. I didn't see it when I saw her. His voice broke, and he turned away, but Poirot's suspicions stirred. A missing brooch could suggest theft or a motive far deeper. Next, Poirot visited Madame Irina Volkov, whose composure had returned, though her fingers still toyed with her pearl necklace. She sat regally, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a hint of defiance. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I know nothing of this dreadful business. I was in my compartment, alone, after my walk. Poirot's smile was polite but probing. Madame, you mentioned a walk near midnight. Did you pass Madame Grayson's compartment? Perhaps you noticed something, a sound, a shadow. Irina's lips tightened. I saw nothing, heard nothing. The corridor was quiet, except for the train's noise. I returned to my bed and slept until the scream. Poirot noted the precision of her words, as if rehearsed. And Madame Grayson, you knew her, perhaps? Irina's eyes widened, then narrowed. Knew her? No, monsieur. I saw her at dinner, that is all. A quiet woman, unremarkable. Her tone was dismissive, but Poirot sensed a lie, subtle but present. He thanked her and moved on, his mind turning over her connection to the victim. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn Warrender were together in Sir Basil's compartment, their card game abandoned on the table. Sir Basil stood as Poirot entered, his military posture unwavering. This is a damnable affair, Poirot, he said. A woman murdered under our noses. What's being done? Poirot raised a hand, calming the outburst. All that can be done? Sir Basil, tell me, where were you both at the time of the scream? Miss Evelyn answered, her voice clipped. We were here, as we told you. We played cards until 1, then retired. We heard nothing until the commotion. Sir Basil nodded. The train's too noisy for small sounds, but a scream like that, it woke us both. Poirot's eyes flicked to the cards, neatly stacked. You play often, I see, and you saw no one in the corridor on your return. None, Miss Evelyn said firmly, but her fingers drummed on the table. A nervous tick that Poirot noted. Madame Giselle Dubois welcomed Poirot with a flourish, her notebook now closed but prominent on her table. Monsieur Poirot, this is a tragedy that begs to be written, she said, her eyes alight. A locked room, a beautiful victim cest, magnifique, none. Poirot's moustache twitched. Magnifique is not the word I would choose, madame. Tell me of this argument you overheard. Can you recall anything more? Dubois leaned forward, her voice low. It was intense, monsieur. A man's voice, low and angry, and a woman's, Madame Grayson, I presume, pleading. It came from her compartment, I think, but the walls are thin, and the train's noise muddled it. I heard no names, only the tone. Poirot pressed her, but she offered no further details, only a theatrical sigh. I wish I could help more, but the muse does not always clarify. John Marlowe, in his adjacent compartment, remained as enigmatic. As before, he sat on his bed, his notebook nowhere in sight, his hands folded calmly. I have nothing new to add, Monsieur Poirot, he said. I slept, I heard the scream, I came out when others did. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur, Marlowe, your compartment is next to Madame Grayson's. You heard nothing before the scream. No voices, no movement. Marlowe's gaze was steady. Nothing. The walls are thick, and I was asleep. Poirot thanked him, but his suspicions deepened. Marlowe's proximity to the crime scene, his reticence, suggested more than mere indifference. Returning to the corridor, Poirot summoned Fournier. "Monsieur, I require the services of the maid, Marie. She cleaned the compartments. Yes, she may have seen something." Fournier nodded and fetched Marie, a slight young woman with wary eyes. She curtsied nervously before Poirot. "Monsieur, I cleaned Madame Grayson's compartment yesterday evening. Everything was in order, and her possessions?" Poirot asked. "You saw this diamond brooch Monsieur Grayson mentioned?" Marie nodded. "Oui, monsieur. It was pinned to her dress, a beautiful thing. I saw it when I turned down her bed. And this morning, after the tragedy," Marie hesitated, her hands twisting. "I did not enter, monsieur, but I looked through the door when Monsieur Fournier opened it. The brooch was not there." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Marie. You have been most helpful." As dawn began to break, casting a pale light through the corridor windows, Poirot stood alone, his mind a whirl of facts and possibilities. The locked compartment, the missing brooch, the overheard argument, all pointed to a killer who knew. The train, the victim, and the art of deception. The scratch on the window, he suspected, was a ruse, meant to mislead. The true method of entry lay elsewhere, perhaps in the very structure of the carriage, and the passengers each, with their secrets, their half-truths, held the key. Poirot returned to his compartment, the violets on his table a faint reminder of order in a world disrupted. He sat, his hands folded, and let his little grey cells work. The Riviera Express, with its elegance and its secrets, was a stage, and the curtain had risen on a drama of death. Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, would not rest until the final act was played. Chapter 4. The missing brooch. The Riviera Express sliced through the early morning mist, its sapphire carriages glinting faintly as the first rays of sunlight pierced the French countryside. Within the first-class carriage, the atmosphere was taut, the memory of Clara Grayson's murder a heavy shroud over the opulent surroundings. Hercule Poirot, his suit immaculate despite the hour, stood in the corridor. His green eyes narrowed as he contemplated the latest thread in the intricate tapestry of the crime, the missing diamond brooch. Its absence, noted by both Harold Grayson and the maid Marie, was no mere detail. It was a beacon, illuminating the motives and methods of a calculating killer. Poirot's mustache twitched as he murmured to himself, "The brooch. It is not merely stolen. It is a message, a clue, a misdirection. But to what end?" The corridor, now bathed in the soft glow of morning, was quiet save for the rhythmic clatter of the train. Monsieur Fournier, ever dutiful, stood guard outside Clara's sealed compartment, his face etched with fatigue. Poirot approached him, his cane tapping lightly on the burgundy carpet. "Monsieur Fournier," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "we must search the compartments of all passengers. The brooch, it is a key to this puzzle, and we shall find where it hides." Eyes widened, his hands fluttering nervously. "A search, Monsieur Poirot. The passengers, they will protest. They are not accustomed to such intrusions." Poirot's smile was thin but resolute. "Protest they may, but a murder has been committed, and the Riviera Express is no place for delicacy. You will assist me, and we shall proceed with discretion but firmness." Reluctantly, Fournier agreed, and Poirot began his methodical investigation, starting with the passenger's luggage. He knew the brooch's disappearance could point to theft, a personal vendetta, or a deliberate attempt to mislead. Each possibility, he reasoned, would reveal something of the killer's mind. He began with Harold Grayson, whose compartment was a study in disarray papers strewn across the table. A half-empty glass of bourbon teetering on the edge. Grayson, red-eyed and haggard, stood by as Poirot and Fournier examined his belongings. "You won't find anything," Grayson said, his voice hoarse. "I told you, the brooch was Clara's. I gave it to her for our anniversary. It was worth thousands." Poirot's gloved fingers moved deftly through Grayson's suitcase, finding only clothes, a shaving kit, and a bundle of business letters. "And you are certain, Monsieur Grayson, that the brooch was in her possession last night?" Grayson nodded, his jaw tight. "She wore it at dinner. Pinned to her dress, right here." He touched his chest, his hand trembling slightly. Poirot noted the gesture, sensing a mixture of grief and something less definable, guilt perhaps, or fear. The search of Madame Irina Volkov's compartment was a contrast in elegance. Her luggage, monogrammed and meticulously packed, contained furs, silk gowns, and a velvet case of jewelry that sparkled even in the dim light. Irina watched Poirot with a haughty air, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace. "This is an outrage." "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her Russian accent sharp, "my possessions are private." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Madame, a woman is dead, and her brooch is missing. Privacy must yield to justice. If you please, open the velvet case." Irina hesitated, then complied, revealing an array of diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires, but no diamond brooch matching Grayson's description. Poirot's gaze lingered on a small, locked diary tucked among her things. "And this, Madame, what does it contain?" Her lips tightened. "Personal thoughts, monsieur. Nothing to do with your inquiry." Poirot did not press further, but his mind catalogued the diary's existence. A woman like Irina Volkov, he thought, kept secrets as carefully as she kept her jewels. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn Warrender's compartments were searched together, their mutual indignation palpable. Sir Basil's luggage held military medals, a service revolver unloaded, Poirot noted, and a well-worn copy of Clausewitz's On War. Miss Evelyn's was more Spartan, with sensible clothing and a sewing kit, but a small leather pouch caught Poirot's eye. Inside were several banknotes and a receipt for a loan, dated 6 months prior, with Clara Grayson's name as the lender. "A financial connection," Poirot said softly, holding up the receipt. "You did not mention this." "Mademoiselle Warrender." Evelyn's face flushed, her voice sharp. "It was a private matter, long settled. Clara lent me money during a difficult time. I repaid her. It has no bearing on this." Sir Basil interjected, his tone gruff. "My sister's affairs are her own, Poirot. You're barking up the wrong tree." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "In a murder, monsieur, every tree must be examined. Madame Giselle Dubois's compartment was a writer's haven, cluttered with notebooks, pens, and scraps of paper covered in florid handwriting. She watched the search with a mixture of amusement and curiosity, her auburn hair catching the light. "You seek inspiration in my chaos, monsieur," she teased, gesturing to her manuscripts. Poirot's eyes scanned a page, noting a description of a fictional murder stabbed in a locked room, no less. "Your imagination, madame, is remarkably prescient," he said, his tone dry. The search revealed no brooch, but a folded newspaper clipping about a Parisian jewelry theft, dated 3 years prior, piqued his interest. "You follow such stories, madame?" Dubois shrugged, her smile enigmatic. "A novelist must know the world, monsieur. Crime is my canvas." John Marlowe's compartment was the last, and Poirot approached it with particular interest. Marlowe stood calmly, his hands in his pockets, as Poirot examined his sparse belongings: a change of clothes, a shaving kit, and a small map of the train's route, marked with times and stops. "For personal interest, monsieur?" Poirot asked, holding up the map. Marlowe's expression remained neutral. "I like to know where I'm going," he said simply. Beneath the map, Poirot found a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with cryptic shorthand. He raised an eyebrow, but Marlowe offered no explanation. "My work," he said, his tone final. No brooch was found, but the map and notebook deepened Poirot's suspicion of Marlowe's reticence. The search complete, Poirot returned to the corridor, where Fournier awaited. "Nothing, monsieur," the conductor said, his voice heavy. "The brooch is gone." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Not gone, Monsieur Fournier. Hidden, perhaps, or destroyed. But its absence speaks as loudly as its presence would." He summoned Marie, the maid, for a second interview. She stood nervously, her hands clasped. "Mademoiselle, you are certain the brooch was on Madame Grayson's dress last night?" "Oui, monsieur," Marie said, her voice steady. "I saw it when I turned down her bed, pinned to her blue dress. It was shaped like a star, with a large diamond in the center." "And this morning?" Marie shook her head. "I did not see it, monsieur. The dress was still there, but the brooch was gone." Poirot thanked her, his thoughts turning inward. The brooch's absence suggested theft, but the precision of Clara's murderer, single, clean stab, pointed to a motive beyond greed. Was the brooch a trophy, a distraction, or a link to a deeper grudge? He recalled Irina's nervous fingers, Grayson's trembling hand, Evelyn's loan receipt, Dubois's clipping, and Marlowe's map. Each passenger, he knew, held a piece of the truth. As the train approached Lyon, Poirot stood by the window, watching the mist dissolve into sunlight. The locked compartment, the missing brooch, the silent witnesses, these were the threads of a web, and at its center sat a killer. "The brooch," he murmured, "it is not the end, but the beginning. And Hercule Poirot shall follow where it leads." Chapter 5. The Countess's secret. The Riviera Express surged through the French countryside, its polished carriages cutting a sleek path through the morning light. The rolling hills, dappled with vineyards and olive groves, blurred past the windows. But within the first-class carriage, the air was heavy with suspicion and unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot, his suit as pristine as his resolve, stood in the corridor, his green eyes fixed on the door of compartment number 3, home to Madame Irina Volkov, the Russian countess. Her elegance, her nervous gestures, and her evasive answers had piqued his curiosity from the moment he boarded. Now, with Clara Grayson's murder unresolved and the missing diamond brooch a tantalizing clue, Poirot sensed that Irina held a key to the mysterious secret buried beneath her polished exterior. The corridor was quiet. The other passengers, either in their compartments or gathered in the dining car, whispering about the tragedy. Monsieur Fournier, the conductor, had retreated to his service car, leaving Poirot to pursue his inquiries undisturbed. He knocked softly on Irina's door, his cane tucked under one arm, his demeanor one of courteous insistence. The door opened to reveal the countess, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her fur stole replaced by a silk robe that shimmered in the soft light. Her eyes, sharp and wary, met Poirot's with a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her Russian accent lending a musical lilt to her words. "To what do I owe this visit?" Poirot bowed slightly, his mustache twitching. "Madame Volkoff, I regret the intrusion, but a murder demands answers, and I believe you may hold some." "May I enter?" Irina hesitated, her fingers tightening on the doorframe, then stepped aside. With a regal nod, "Very well, monsieur. But I warn you, I have little to offer." The compartment was a study in luxury, its velvet seat draped with a cashmere shawl, its table adorned with a silver cigarette case and a crystal decanter of cognac. Poirot sat carefully, his hands folded over his cane, and observed Irina as she settled opposite him. Her movements were graceful, but the faint tremor in her hands betrayed her composure. "Madame," he began, his voice gentle but probing, "you have said you did not know Madame Grayson, yet I sense there is more to your story. A woman of your distinction does not travel alone on the Riviera Express without purpose. Will you share it with Hercule Poirot?" Irina's lips parted, then closed, her eyes darting to the window as if seeking escape in the passing landscape. "You are perceptive, monsieur," she said at last, her voice low. "Very well. I knew Clara Grayson, but not as you might think. Years ago, in Paris, she was a governess in my household, teaching my younger sister, Natasha. Clara was competent, but there was a scandal." Poirot's eyebrow rose, though he remained silent, encouraging her to continue. Irina's fingers twisted her pearl necklace, a habit Poirot had noted before. "Jewelry went missing from our home," she said. "A sapphire bracelet, a family heirloom. Clara was accused, though she denied it. The police found no proof, but my father dismissed her. She left in disgrace, and I had not seen her since until this journey." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze steady. "And this scandal, madame, it left ill feelings, perhaps a desire for retribution." Irina's eyes flashed. "You think I killed her? For a bracelet, years ago?" "I am a countess, Monsieur Poirot, not a petty thief or murderer yet," Poirot said softly. "The past has a way of lingering, like a shadow. Tell me, madame, did you speak to Madame Grayson on this train, perhaps to confront her about this old wound?" Irina's composure faltered, her hand pausing mid-twist. I saw her at dinner, as I told you. We did not speak, but—" She hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw her in the corridor late last night, before my walk. She was speaking to a man, quietly, urgently. I could not see his face, but she seemed afraid." Poirot's interest sharpened. "A man, madame. Can you describe him? His voice, his manner?" Irina shook her head, her expression troubled. "It was dark, monsieur, and they were at the far end of the corridor. His voice was low, perhaps English or American, but I could not be sure. I did not wish to intrude, so I turned away." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing this new detail. "And your walk, madame, where did it take you? Did you pass Madame Grayson's compartment again?" Irina's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap. "I walked to the dining car, then back. I did not linger near her door. I heard nothing, saw nothing, until the scream." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "Merci, madame. Your candor is appreciated. But I must ask your diary. The one I saw during the search. It contains personal thoughts, you said. Might it also contain memories of Clara Grayson, Irina's? Face paled, her hand moving instinctively to the locked diary on her table. That is private, monsieur. It has no bearing on this matter. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. Privacy, madame, is a luxury we cannot afford when murder is afoot. I shall respect your wishes for now, but the truth, it has a way of emerging. Leaving Irina's compartment, Poirot paused in the corridor, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The countess's story of the Parisian scandal added a new layer to the mystery. Clara Grayson, a governess accused of theft, now murdered, and her diamond brooch missing. Coincidence, or a deliberate echo of the past? Irina's account of the late-night encounter in the corridor was intriguing, but her reluctance to reveal more suggested she was protecting someone or herself. Poirot's next stop was the dining car, where he found Marie, the maid, polishing silverware with nervous energy. She curtsied as he approached, her eyes wary. Mademoiselle Marie, Poirot said, his tone soothing, you have been most helpful about the brooch. Tell me, did you ever hear Madame Grayson speak of a past in Paris, perhaps as a governess? Marie's hands paused, her cloth still. Monsieur, she never spoke of such things, but she was uneasy. Last night, when I turned down her bed, she asked me to check the lock twice. She said she didn't feel safe. Poirot's moustache twitched. Not safe, you say? Did she mention a reason? A person, perhaps? Marie shook her head. No, monsieur. She just seemed frightened. She kept touching the brooch, as if it meant something special. Thanking her, Poirot returned to his compartment, where he sat at the small table, the scent of violets grounding him as his thoughts raced. The brooch, the scandal, the mysterious man in the corridor, each was a thread in the web of Clara Grayson's death. Irina's story suggested a motive rooted in the past, but her nervous demeanor and locked diary hinted at deeper secrets. Was she a victim of circumstance, or a player in a more sinister game? As the train neared Lyon, where the police would board, Poirot knew time was short. The locked compartment, the missing brooch, and now the countess's secret formed a constellation of clues, but the pattern remained elusive. He closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work, their silent machinery piecing together the fragments. The Riviera Express, with its elegance and its shadows, was a stage for human passions, and Hercule Poirot was determined to unmask the one who had turned it into a scene of murder. Chapter 6. The industrialists burdened the Riviera Express carved its path through the French landscape, the midday sun casting dappled shadows across the rolling fields outside. Within the first-class carriage, the air was thick with tension, the spectre of Clara Grayson's murder lingering like a storm cloud. Hercule Poirot, his demeanor as precise as his polished shoes, sat in his compartment. His green eyes narrowed as he contemplated the latest threads in the intricate web of the crime. The missing diamond brooch, the locked compartment, and Madame Irina Volkoff's revelation of a past scandal had deepened the mystery. But it was Harold Grayson, the grieving widower, who now occupied Poirot's thoughts. The American industrialist's raw emotion, coupled with his evasive glances, suggested a man carrying a burden heavier than grief alone. Poirot's moustache twitched as he murmured, Monsieur Grayson, you are a puzzle within a puzzle. But Hercule Poirot shall uncover your truth. The corridor outside was quiet. The passengers subdued as they awaited the train's arrival in Lyon, where the police would take charge. Poirot, however, had no intention of relinquishing the investigation just yet. The little grey cells, as he called them, demanded answers, and Grayson's inconsistencies his trembling hands. His vague account of the night were a clarion call to delve deeper. Poirot rose, adjusted his tie, and made his way to compartment number 6, where Grayson had retreated after the morning's search. He knocked softly, and the door opened to reveal Grayson. His broad frame slumped in the velvet chair, a glass of bourbon clutched in one hand. His face was haggard, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a hardness in his jaw that Poirot noted a man bracing himself against scrutiny. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, "I must speak with you again. The matter of your wife's death grows more complex, and I believe you have more to share." Grayson's gaze flickered, a mix of defiance and exhaustion. "I've told you everything, Poirot. Clara's gone, and I don't know who did it. What more do you want?" Poirot settled opposite him, his cane resting across his knees, his posture erect. "The truth, monsieur, is rarely everything, but it is always enough. Let us begin with your marriage. You described Madame Grayson as an angel, yet I observe she was nervous, perhaps afraid. Why did she insist on a separate compartment?" Grayson took a swig of bourbon, his hand steadying as if the liquor fortified him. "Clara was delicate. She liked her privacy, especially when traveling. Said it helped her think. I didn't question it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, monsieur, the maid Marie tells me Madame Grayson was uneasy last night, checking her lock, touching her brooch as if it were a talisman. She spoke of feeling unsafe. Did she confide such fears to you?" Grayson's grip on the glass tightened, his knuckles whitening. "She was always a bit jumpy," he said, his voice low. "Nerves, you know. She didn't like crowds, strangers. I thought it was just her way." Poirot leaned forward, his tones soft but insistent. "Monsieur, I put it to you that Madame Grayson feared something specific, a person, perhaps, or a threat. Did she speak of debts, of enemies, of anything that might explain her fear?" Grayson's eyes darted to the window, avoiding Poirot's gaze. "Debts? No, nothing like that. We were comfortable. My business, Grayson Steelitz, had its ups and downs, but Clara's money kept us afloat. Her inheritance, you see. She was generous." Poirot's mustache twitched at the mention of money. "An inheritance, monsieur? A substantial one, I presume?" Grayson nodded, his expression guarded. "Her father was a banker in Boston, left her a fortune. She didn't care for it, but it was hers. We lived well. And your business?" Poirot pressed. "These ups and downs, they were serious. Perhaps enough to cause strain in your marriage." Grayson's face flushed, and he set the glass down with a clink. "What are you implying, Poirot? That I'd kill my own wife for money?" "I loved Clara. She was everything to me." Poirot raised a hand, his smile placating but his eyes sharp. "I imply nothing, monsieur. I seek only the truth. But money, it is a powerful motive, and a husband who benefits from his wife's wealth must be examined. Tell me, did you know of her past in Paris, as a governess?" Grayson blinked, caught off guard. Paris? She never mentioned it. Clara wasn't one for talking about her past. Said it didn't matter. Poirot filed this away, noting the inconsistency with Irina Volkov's account. He rose, bowing slightly. "Merci, Monsieur Grayson. Your candor is appreciated, but I advise you do not withhold what may help us find your wife's killer." Leaving Grayson's compartment, Poirot sought out Marie, the maid, who was tidying the dining car. Her nervous demeanor softened under Poirot's gentle questioning. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you mentioned Madame Grayson's unease. Did you ever hear her speak of her husband's business, or of financial troubles?" Marie hesitated, her hands twisting her apron. "Not directly, monsieur, but once, when I was cleaning, I heard her on the telephone in Calais before we boarded. She was whispering, saying something about debts piling up and he can't know. I thought she meant Monsieur Grayson." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And this conversation, mademoiselle, who was she speaking to?" Marie shook her head. "I don't know, monsieur. She stopped when she saw me." Thanking her, Poirot returned to the corridor, his mind a whirl of new connections. Grayson's faltering business, Clara's inheritance, her whispered fears of debts. These painted a picture of a marriage under strain, perhaps a motive for murder. But the locked compartment and the missing brooch suggested a plan more intricate than a desperate husband's act. Poirot decided to revisit the scene of the crime. Gaining entry to compartment number 5 with Fournier's key, the air within was stale. The sheet over Clara's body, a stark reminder of the tragedy. Poirot's eyes scanned the room anew, seeking what he might have missed. The faint scratch on the window frame still intrigued him, but his attention was drawn to the wall panel near the bed, where he had noted a hollow sound. He tapped it again, listening intently. The sound was distinct, suggesting a space behind. With Fournier's assistance, he pressed and prodded, but the panel remained fixed, no hidden catch revealing itself. "A possibility," Poirot murmured, "but not yet the answer." As he left the compartment, he encountered John Marlowe, emerging from his own compartment next door. Marlowe's calm demeanor was unchanged, but his proximity to the crime scene nagged at Poirot. "Monsieur Marlowe," he said, pausing, "your compartment shares a wall with Madame Grayson's. You heard nothing, not even a muffled sound, before the scream." Marlowe's eyes met Poirot's, steady and unyielding. "As I said, monsieur, I was asleep. The train's noise drowns out much." Poirot nodded, but his suspicions lingered. Marlowe's reticence, his map, his notebook. There was more to this quiet Englishman than met the eye. As the train's whistle signaled the approach to Lyon, Poirot stood by the corridor window, the sunlight casting long shadows across his face. Harold Grayson's burdened financial strain, a nervous wife, a hidden past added weight to the mystery. The brooch, the locked door, the countess's scandal, and now the whispers of debt formed a complex mosaic. "The truth," Poirot murmured, "it lies in the shadows of these burdens, and Hercule Poirot shall bring it to light." Chapter 7. The novelist's tale. The Riviera Express glided through the golden afternoon, its sapphire carriages a stark contrast to the somber mood within. The French countryside, with its patchwork of vineyards and sunlit hills, passed unnoticed by the passengers, whose thoughts were consumed by the shadow of Clara Grayson's murder. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit a testament to his unyielding precision, paced the narrow corridor of the first-class carriage, his green eyes alight with the quiet intensity of a man unraveling a puzzle. The missing diamond brooch, the locked compartment, the countess's buried scandal, and Harold Grayson's financial burdens had woven a complex tapestry. But it was Madame Giselle Dubois, the flamboyant French novelist, who now drew Poirot's attention. Her theatricality, her cryptic remarks about inspiration, and her claim of overhearing an argument suggested she was more than a mere observer of this drama. Poirot's moustache twitched as he murmured, "Madame Dubois, your tales are vivid, but it is the truth behind them that Hercule Poirot seeks." The dining car, where Poirot found Madame Dubois, was a haven of elegance, its crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light across the white linen tablecloths. She sat alone at a corner table, a cup of black coffee before her, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she scribbled in her ever-present notebook. Her silk dress, a vibrant emerald, rustled as she looked up, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice rich with Parisian charm, "have you come to join my audience, or to cast me in your own little drama?" Poirot offered a courteous smile, settling opposite her with his cane resting lightly against the table. "Madame Dubois, your flair for the dramatic is undeniable, but it is your observations, not your performance, that interests me today. You spoke of an argument you overheard between Madame Grayson and a man on the night of her death. I wish to know more." Dubois leaned back, her fingers toying with the pen, her gaze appraising. "You are relentless, monsieur, like a hound on the scent. Very well. It was after dinner, perhaps 11 o'clock. I was in my compartment, writing, when I heard voices through the wall. A woman, Madame Grayson, I believe her tone was sharp, almost pleading. The man's voice was lower, harder, with an edge of menace. I could not catch the words, only the feeling. It lasted but a moment, then silence. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloguing her words. And this man, Madame, his accent, his manner. Was he English, American, perhaps French? Dubois tilted her head, her lips curving in a half-smile. "You ask me to paint a portrait with shadows, monsieur." The voice was not French, I think English or American, but muffled by the train's rumble. I heard no names, no specifics, only the passion of their exchange. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "And you did nothing, madame. You, a novelist of crime, did not investigate this passion." Her laughter was a bright trill, but Poirot detected a note of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, I am a writer, not a detective. I observe, I imagine, I create. I thought it a lover's quarrel, nothing more. Had I known..." She trailed off, her eyes flickering to her notebook. Poirot's gaze followed hers, resting on the leather-bound volume. "Your notebook, madame, it contains more than stories, perhaps. A record of this journey, of its passengers." Dubois' hand moved protectively over the notebook, her smile tightening. "My notes are my own, monsieur. They are sketches, ideas, nothing more. A novelist must keep her secrets, lest her muse desert her." Poirot's mustache twitched, his suspicion deepening. "And yet, madame, I found in your compartment a manuscript tale of a murder in a locked room, remarkably similar to our present tragedy. Is this coincidence, or inspiration drawn from life?" Dubois's eyes widened, then narrowed, her composure faltering for a moment. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, I am writing a story of a train murder, but it is fiction, nothing more. The locked room, the stabbing it, is a trope, a classic. I draw from the air, not from this train." Poirot nodded, his expression neutral but his mind racing. "And this newspaper clipping, madame, about a Parisian jewelry theft 3 years ago. You collect such stories for your work." She shrugged, her gesture deliberately careless. "A writer must know the world, monsieur. Crime, passion, betrayal, these are my materials. That clipping is one of many." Sensing she would reveal no more, Poirot shifted his approach. "Tell me, madame, did you know Madame Grayson before this journey? Perhaps in Paris, where you both spent time?" Dubois's pen paused mid-air, her eyes meeting Poirot's with a flicker of surprise. "Paris is a large city, monsieur. I did not know her. I saw her at dinner, a quiet woman clinging to her husband's arm. That is all." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Merci, madame. Your tale is vivid, but I suspect it is not yet complete. I shall return when the plot thickens." Leaving the dining car, Poirot sought out Monsieur Fournier, who was overseeing preparations for the police's arrival in Lyon. "Monsieur Fournier," Poirot said, "I require access to Madame Dubois's compartment once more. There is something I must see." Fournier, though weary, complied, and Poirot re-entered compartment number 4. The space was as cluttered as before, papers and pens scattered across the table. He examined the manuscript again, noting the precise description of a murderer, single stab, a missing jewel, a train setting. The parallels were striking, but Poirot knew better than to trust coincidence. He turned to the newspaper clipping tucked beneath a stack of notes. It detailed a theft in Paris, a diamond necklace stolen from a wealthy family with no arrests made. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Inspiration," in Dubois's florid script. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Inspiration, indeed," he murmured. Was Dubois merely a keen observer, weaving real events into her fiction, or had she known Clara Grayson, perhaps linked to the theft Irina Volkov had mentioned? The possibility of a connection between the Parisian scandal and the current crime grew stronger. He summoned Marie, the maid, who appeared promptly, her apron spotless despite her nervous demeanor. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "you saw Madame Grayson's brooch last night. Did you ever see Madame Dubois near her compartment, perhaps speaking with her?" Marie shook her head. "Nan, monsieur. Madame Dubois kept to herself, always writing. But," she hesitated, her voice dropping, "I saw her in the corridor once, late, looking toward Madame Grayson's door. She didn't knock, just stood there, then left." Poirot thanked her, his mind turning over this new detail. Dubois's claim of overhearing an argument, her manuscript, her lingering in the corridor, each suggested a woman more involved than she admitted. Was she a bystander, captivated by the drama, or a player in it? Her novelists flare a mask for darker intentions. As the train's whistle signaled the approach to Lyon, Poirot stood in the corridor, the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting his shadow long and sharp. The novelist's tale, with its echoes of the crime, was a thread in the web of Clara Grayson's death, the brooch, the locked compartment, the countess's scandal, Grayson's debts, and now Dubois's cryptic story formed a constellation of clues, each pointing to a truth just out of reach. "The pen," Poirot murmured, "is mightier than the sword, but it may also conceal a dagger. Hercule Poirot shall see which it is." Chapter 8. The Colonel and his sister, the Riviera Express, thundered onward through the late afternoon, its polished carriages slicing through the golden haze of the French countryside. The vineyards and stone villages outside seemed untouched by the darkness within, where the murder of Clara Grayson cast a long shadow over the first-class carriage. Hercule Poirot, his suit as immaculate as his resolve, stood in the corridor. His green eyes narrowed as he considered the latest threads in the intricate web of the crime: the missing diamond brooch, the locked compartment, the countess's Parisian scandal, Harold Grayson's financial woes, and Madame Dubois's unsettling manuscript had each added layers to the mystery. Now Poirot's attention turned to Sir Basil Warrender and his sister, Miss Evelyn Warrender, whose clipped exchanges and guarded demeanor suggested secrets of their own. His moustache twitched as he murmured, "The colonel and his sister, they present a united front. But beneath it, there is discord. Hercule Poirot shall find what it conceals." The corridor was hushed, the passengers either cloistered in their compartments or lingering in the dining car, their whispers heavy with speculation. The train's imminent arrival in Lyon loomed, promising the intervention of the police, but Poirot was determined to unravel the truth before official hands muddied the waters. He knocked on the door of compartment number 9, Sir Basil's, where he knew the siblings were likely together, their habit of shared evenings a detail he had noted. The door opened to reveal Sir Basil, his military bearing as rigid as ever, his weathered face set in a frown. Behind him stood Miss Evelyn, her angular features sharpened by impatience, her tweed suit a stark contrast to the carriage's opulence. "Poirot," Sir Basil said gruffly, stepping aside. "I suppose you've more questions. Let's have it, then." Poirot entered, his cane tapping lightly on the carpet, and settled into a chair, his posture erect. "Sir Basil, Mademoiselle Warrender," he began, his voice calm but probing. "The tragedy of Madame Grayson's death grows more complex, and I believe you both may hold pieces of the puzzle. May we speak frankly?" Evelyn's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing. "Frankly, Monsieur Poirot, we've told you all we know. We were playing cards until one heard nothing, saw nothing. This insistence on questioning us is tiresome." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "Tiresome, mademoiselle. Murder is a tiresome business, yet it demands answers. Let us revisit your evening. You were in the dining car, you say, until 1 o'clock. Did anyone see you there?" Sir Basil nodded, his moustache bristling. "The waiter, Jacques, served us coffee. He can confirm it. We played bridge, as we often do. Nothing unusual." Poirot's eyes flicked to the table, where a deck of cards lay neatly stacked, as if untouched since their game. "And after, you returned to your compartments numbers 9 and 10, side by side. You heard no sounds, no voices, before the scream." Evelyn's fingers drummed on the armrest. A nervous tick, Poirot noted. "As we said, the train is noisy. We retired and slept until the commotion woke us." "Really, Monsieur Poirot, you're grasping at straws." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, but straws can build a case. During the search of your belongings, I found a receipt alone from Madame Grayson to you. Mademoiselle Warrender, a private matter, you said, yet it connects you to the victim. Will you explain?" Evelyn's face flushed, her voice sharp. "I told you, it was settled. Clara lent me money 2 years ago, when our family estate faced difficulties. I repaid her in full." "It's irrelevant," Sir Basil interjected, his tone defensive. "My sister's finances are her own, Poirot. Clara was a friend of the family, nothing more. This loan business is ancient history." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ancient history, Sir Basil, has a way of shaping the present. Tell me, did either of you speak with Madame Grayson on this journey, perhaps about this loan or other matters?" Sir Basil shook his head. "We saw her at dinner, that's all. She was with her husband, looking pale as usual. We didn't speak." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes darted to her brother, a fleeting glance Poirot caught. "She kept to herself," she said. "We had no reason to approach her." Poirot's mind turned to the receipt, its date recent enough to suggest ongoing ties. He shifted his approach. "Sir Basil, your service revolver, it was in your luggage, unloaded. A precaution, perhaps, but it suggests a man accustomed to danger. Did you sense any threat on this train? Sir Basil's jaw tightened. I carry it out of habit, Poirot. Military life leaves its mark. I sensed no threat, but clearly I was wrong. Poirot rose, his gaze lingering on the siblings. Merci, Sir Basil, Mademoiselle Warrender. Your cooperation is noted. But I advise you secrets, like shadows, grow longer in the light of truth. Leaving their compartment, Poirot sought out Jacques, the dining car waiter, to verify their alibi. Jacques, a wiry man with a quick smile, confirmed serving coffee to the Warrenders until just before 1. They were deep in their game, monsieur, he said, arguing over points, as always. The alibi held, but Poirot's suspicions lingered. Evelyn's nervous drumming, her quick defense of the loan, and the glance she exchanged with her brother suggested a tension beyond sibling rivalry. He decided to revisit Clara's compartment, hoping to uncover a new clue. With Fournier's key, he entered number 5, the air within still heavy with the scent of jasmine and death. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, settling on the wall panel. Near the bed, where he had noted a hollow sound. He tapped it again, the faint echo confirming his earlier observation. With careful pressure, he tested the panel's edges, but it remained fixed. A secret, perhaps, he murmured, but not yet revealed. As he left, he encountered Marie, the maid, polishing the corridor's brass fittings. Mademoiselle, he said, did you ever see Mademoiselle Warrender or Sir Basil near Madame Grayson's compartment? Marie hesitated, her cloth pausing. Once, monsieur, yesterday evening. Mademoiselle Warrender was in the corridor, looking at Madame Grayson's door. She didn't knock, just stood there, then walked away. Poirot thanked her, his mind racing. Evelyn's presence near Clara's door, the loan receipt, the siblings' defensiveness, these were threads in a tightening net. The brooch, the locked compartment, the countess's scandal, Grayson's debts, Dubois's manuscript, and now the Warrenders' connection to Clara formed a constellation of motives. As the train's whistle signaled the nearing of Lyon, Poirot stood by the window, the fading light casting his reflection sharp and resolute. The colonel and his sister, he murmured, they guard their secrets well, but Hercule Poirot shall uncover them piece by piece. Chapter 9. The Englishman's silence. The Riviera Express pressed forward through the twilight, its sapphire carriages glowing faintly under the deepening indigo of the French sky. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels was a steady pulse, but within the first-class carriage, an undercurrent of unease pulsed stronger still. The murder of Clara Grayson, with its locked compartment and missing diamond brooch, had woven a web of suspicion that ensnared every passenger. Hercule Poirot, his tailored suit as sharp as his intellect, stood in the corridor, his green eyes fixed on the door of compartment number 8. John Marlowe, the reserved Englishman, had intrigued him from the outset. His silence, his cryptic notebook, and his proximity to the crime scene marked him as a figure of quiet enigma. Poirot's moustache twitched as he murmured, Monsieur Marlowe, you say little, but your silence speaks volumes. Hercule Poirot shall hear what it says. The corridor was still, the other passengers either in their compartments or whispering. In the dining car, their voices hushed with the weight of the tragedy. The train's approach to Lyon, where the police would soon board, loomed like a deadline, urging Poirot to extract the truth before official hands disrupted his method. He knocked on Marlowe's door, his cane tucked under his arm, his demeanor one of courteous persistence. The door opened to reveal Marlowe, his lean frame filling the doorway, his brown hair neatly combed, his eyes cool and unreadable. He wore a plain but well-cut suit, and his hands were tucked into his pockets. A gesture Poirot had come to associate with his guarded nature. "Monsieur Poirot," Marlowe said, his voice even, "I expected you'd return. What more do you need?" Poirot stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the compartment. It was Spartan compared to the others. A single suitcase, a folded newspaper, and no trace of the notebook or the map of the train's route he had seen during the search. "Monsieur Marlowe," Poirot began, settling into the chair with deliberate care, "you are a man of few words, which makes those you choose all the more significant. Your compartment is next to Madame Grayson's, yet you heard nothing before her scream. I find this curious." Marlowe remained standing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes wary. "As I've said, I was asleep. The train's noise masks much. I woke to the scream, stepped into the corridor, and saw the others already gathering." Poirot's smile was polite but probing. "And yet, monsieur, your proximity to the crime scene places you in a position of interest. Tell me, what is your profession?" "A man who carries a map marked with times and stops, who writes in shorthand, is not merely a tourist." Marlowe's jaw tightened, a flicker of tension breaking his calm. "I'm a private investigator, Monsieur Poirot," he said at last. "I was hired to follow someone on this train. That's all I'll say." Poirot's eyebrow rose, his interest sharpening. A private investigator. Most intriguing, and this someone. Was it Madame Grayson? Marlowe hesitated, his hands shifting in his pockets. "Yes," he admitted, his voice low. "My client wished to know her movements. I was to observe, nothing more." Poirot leaned forward, his cane resting across his knees. "And who is this client, monsieur?" "Their identity may shed light on Madame Grayson's fate." Marlowe's gaze hardened. "I can't tell you that. Confidentiality is my trade. But I'll say this: I saw nothing to suggest murder. Clara Grayson was nervous, yes, but alive when I last saw her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And when was that, monsieur? You have not mentioned seeing her." Marlowe's lips pressed into a thin line, as if he regretted his slip. "Late last night, in the corridor. She was slipping a note under a door number 3, I think. I didn't linger. It wasn't my business." Poirot's mind raced. Number 3 was Irina Volkov's compartment. "A note, you say? Did you see its contents, or what Madame Grayson did next?" Marlowe shook his head. "No, she saw me, looked startled, and hurried back to her compartment. I returned to mine and went to bed." Poirot nodded, his thoughts turning to Irina's evasive account of her late-night walk. "And your notebook, monsieur, the one with shorthand? It contains observations of Madame Grayson, perhaps?" Marlowe's expression remained impassive. "My notes are private, Monsieur Poirot. They're for my client, not for this investigation." Poirot rose, his smile unchanged, but his suspicion deepened. "Privacy, monsieur, is a luxury when murder is afoot. I thank you for your candor, such as it is. But I warn you, silence can be as revealing as speech." Leaving Marlowe's compartment, Poirot sought out Monsieur Fournier, who was preparing for the police's arrival. "Monsieur Fournier," Poirot said, "I must see Madame Volkov's compartment again. A note, slipped under her door, may be significant." Fournier, weary but compliant, unlocked compartment number 3. Irina was absent, likely in the dining car, and Poirot searched the floor near the door. Beneath the velvet chair, half hidden by the cashmere shawl, he found a crumpled piece of paper. Unfolding it, He read a brief, handwritten message in Clara's delicate script. "Meet me tonight. We must settle this." The note was unsigned beyond the initials, but its urgency was clear. Poirot tucked the note into his pocket, his mind whirling. Had Clara been confronting Irina about the Parisian scandal, or was there another matter at play? Marlowe's observation placed Clara at Irina's door, yet Irina had denied any contact. The lie, if it was one, tightened the web around the countess. Poirot next questioned Marie, the maid who was polishing the corridor's brass sconces. "Mademoiselle," he said, "did you ever see Monsieur Marlowe near Madame Grayson's compartment, perhaps watching her?" Marie nodded hesitantly. "Once, monsieur. Yesterday afternoon. He was in the corridor, looking at her door. He didn't knock, just stood there, then left when he saw me." Poirot thanked her, his thoughts aligning. Marlowe's role as an investigator, his observation of Clara, his silence about his client all pointed to a man with knowledge he withheld. Was he merely a witness, or had his surveillance crossed into something more sinister? As the train's whistle signaled the nearing of Lyon, Poirot stood by the corridor window, the twilight casting his reflection in sharp relief. The Englishman's silence, the note to Irina, the brooch, the locked compartment, the countess's scandal, Grayson's debts, Dubois's manuscript, and the Warrender's loan formed a mosaic of motives and secrets. "Monsieur Marlowe," Poirot murmured, "you watch from the shadows, but Hercule Poirot sees all. The truth, it shall not remain silent." Chapter 10. The train's secrets unravel. The Riviera Express sped through the gathering dusk, its sapphire carriages a gleaming thread weaving through the twilight of the French countryside. The distant lights of Lyon glimmered on the horizon, signaling the imminent arrival of the police, but within the first-class carriage, the air was charged with the electricity of an unfolding mystery. Hercule Poirot, his immaculate suit a silent testament to his unyielding precision, stood in the corridor, his green eyes alight with the clarity of a man on the cusp of revelation. The locked compartment, the missing diamond brooch, the countess's scandal, Harold Grayson's financial strain, Madame Dubois's manuscript, the Warrender's loan, and John Marlowe's cryptic silence had woven a tapestry of secrets. Now, Poirot felt the threads converging, the pattern of Clara Grayson's murder beginning to take shape. His mustache twitched as he murmured, "The train, it is a stage, and its secrets are ready to speak." Hercule Poirot listens. The dining car, where Poirot summoned the passengers, was a vision of elegance under strain. The crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the white linen tablecloths, but the usual clink of glasses was absent, replaced by the tense murmur of anticipation. The passengers gathered reluctantly, their faces a gallery of unease. Madame Irina Volkov, her pearls gleaming but her fingers restless. Harold Grayson, his broad frame slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn Warrender, their postures rigid with mutual defensiveness. Madame Giselle Dubois, her auburn hair a vivid splash against her emerald dress, and John Marlowe, standing apart, his hands in his pockets, his gaze unreadable. Monsieur Fournier hovered at the edge, his face pale with the weight of the tragedy. Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small frame commanding the room with quiet authority. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured. "A crime has been committed on this train, a woman taken from us in a manner most foul. Madame Clara Grayson lies dead, stabbed in a locked compartment, her diamond brooch missing. Each of you, I believe, holds a piece of the truth. It is time to lay these pieces before us." He paused, letting his words settle, his eyes scanning the faces for reactions. Irina's fingers tightened on her pearls. Grayson's jaw clenched. Evelyn's lips pursed. Dubois's pen tapped her notebook. Marlowe remained still, his silence a wall. "Let us review," Poirot continued. The compartment was locked, the window scratched but unopened, suggesting a killer who entered and exited by another means. The brooch, a gift from Monsieur Grayson, is gone, hinting at theft or a deeper motive. And each of you has a connection to Madame Grayson, whether you admit it or not. He turned to Irina. "Madame Volkoff, you knew Madame Grayson in Paris, as a governess dismissed for a theft she denied. You saw her last night, speaking to a man in the corridor, yet you withheld this until pressed. Why?" Irina's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, it was a fleeting moment. I did not wish to accuse without certainty." Poirot nodded, then faced Grayson. "Monsieur Grayson, your wife's inheritance sustained your faltering business, yet she spoke of debts and fears. You slept apart, and your grief, while genuine, conceals something, perhaps guilt." Grayson's face reddened. "I loved Clara," he said hoarsely. "I'd never hurt her." "You're wrong, Poirot." Poirot's gaze shifted to the Warrenders. "Sir Basil, Mademoiselle, Evelyn, you played cards until one, yet a loan from Madame Grayson to you, Mademoiselle, suggests a financial tie. Your defensiveness betrays unease. What do you hide?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "We've explained the loan. It's irrelevant. You're wasting time." Sir Basil nodded gruffly. "Get to the point, Poirot." Poirot turned to Dubois. "Madame Dubois, your manuscript mirrors this crime-locked room, a stabbing, a missing jewel. You overheard an argument, yet your interest seems more than artistic. What inspires you?" Dubois's smile was tight. "My imagination, monsieur. Nothing more." Finally, Poirot faced Marlowe. "Monsieur Marlowe, a private investigator watching Madame Grayson, yet silent about your client. You saw her slip a note under Madame Volkoff's door, a note that speaks of a meeting. Your silence is a choice, monsieur." "Why?" Marlowe's eyes met Poirot's, steady but guarded. "My job was to observe, not to interfere. I've told you what I saw." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "There is more," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "In Madame Grayson's compartment, I found a hidden panel, accessible from the adjacent compartment number 8, Monsieur. The scratch on the window was a ruse, meant to mislead. The killer entered through this panel, stabbed Madame Grayson, and exited, locking the door behind them. The brooch was not stolen, but planted, to cast suspicion elsewhere." A gasp rippled through the room, but Poirot continued, his tone relentless. "The note, found in Madame Volkoff's compartment, reads, 'Meet me tonight. We must settle this.' CG, it suggests a confrontation, perhaps about the Parisian scandal, or another debt. But who received it, and who acted upon it?" He paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. "Each of you has a motive. Madame Volkoff, a grudge from the past. Monsieur Grayson, financial desperation. Mademoiselle Warrender, a debt unpaid. Madame Dubois, a story too close to truth. Monsieur Marlowe, a client's orders. But only one of you used the panel. Only one struck the fatal blow." The passengers shifted, their eyes darting to one another, but Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "The truth is near," he said. "The Riviera Express carries its secrets, but they unravel one by one. I shall speak with each of you again, and the killer will be revealed. As the passengers dispersed, their whispers trailing like smoke, Poirot stood by the window, the lights of Lyon now visible. The hidden panel, the planted brooch, the note, these were the final pieces of the puzzle. "The train," he murmured. "It hides nothing from Hercule Poirot. The curtain falls, and the truth shall take the stage." Chapter 11. The confrontation. The Riviera Express hurtled through the final stretch of twilight, its sapphire carriages gleaming under the emerging stars as the lights of Lyon grew brighter on the horizon. Within the first-class dining car, the atmosphere was taut as a bowstring. The passengers gathered once more under the crystalline glow of the chandeliers. The clatter of the wheels seemed to underscore the tension, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the pounding of hearts. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small frame radiating an authority that silenced the murmurs. His green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, swept over the assembled faces. Madame Irina Volkov, her pearls clutched tightly. Harold Grayson, his broad shoulders hunched. Sir Basil and Miss Evelyn Warrender, their expressions a mix of defiance and unease. Madame Giselle Dubois, her pen still but her eyes alight with anticipation. And John Marlowe, ever the silent observer. The truth, Poirot knew, was within his grasp, and the time for confrontation had come. His mustache twitched as he murmured to himself, "The stage is set, and Hercule Poirot shall bring down the curtain." "Madame et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, "we stand on the precipice of truth. Madame Clara Grayson was murdered in a locked compartment, her diamond brooch missing, her death a puzzle of precision and deception. Each of you has a secret, a motive, a connection to the victim, but only one of you wielded the blade. Let us unravel the final threads." He paced slowly, his cane tapping the polished floor, his gaze locking onto each passenger in turn. The locked compartment, it was not so impenetrable. A hidden panel connecting Madame Grayson's compartment to number 8 Monsieur Ma. Entry and exit. The scratch on the window was a clever ruse, meant to mislead. The brooch, I deduced, was not stolen, but planted, to cast suspicion elsewhere. And the note, slipped under Madame Volkov's door, signed C.G., spoke of a meeting, a settlement. These are the facts, and they point to a killer among us. A murmur rippled through the group, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing it. "Let us consider the motives. Madame Volkov, you knew Madame Grayson in Paris, dismissed for a theft she denied. A grudge, perhaps." Irina's lips parted, but she said nothing, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot continued, turning to the industrialist, "your wife's inheritance propped up your failing business, yet she spoke of debts and fears. A desperate man might act to secure his future." Grayson's face reddened, his fists clenching, but he remained silent. "Sir Basil and Mademoiselle Warrender," Poirot said, his gaze shifting, "alone from Madame Grayson tied you to her, and your defensiveness suggests more than a settled debt." Evelyn's lips pursed, her fingers drumming, while Sir Basil's jaw tightened. "Madame Dubois," Poirot said, his tone softening but his eyes piercing, "your manuscript mirrors this crime, and your overheard argument hints at knowledge. You withhold a novelist's curiosity or something darker." Dubois's smile was tight, her pen tapping nervously. "And Monsieur Marlowe," Poirot concluded, "a private investigator watching Madame Grayson for an unnamed client, yet silent about your purpose. You saw her slip the note, yet you claim no involvement." Marlowe's gaze remained steady, but his hands stayed deep in his pockets. Poirot paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But there is one detail that clarifies all the note. Meet me tonight. We must settle this. CG, it was found in Madame Volkov's compartment, yet she denies a meeting. The panel, accessible only from Monsieur Marlowe's compartment, suggests opportunity, but the motive, it lies elsewhere. He turned, his eyes locking onto Miss Evelyn Warrender. Mademoiselle Warrender, it is you who killed Madame Grayson. A gasp tore through the room, Evelyn's face paling as Sir Basil stepped forward, his voice booming. This is outrageous, Poirot. You've no proof. Poirot's smile was calm but relentless. Proof, Sir Basil. I have it in abundance. The loan from Madame Grayson was not settled, as you claimed. She lent you money to save your family estate, but you could not repay. She threatened to expose your ruin, did she not? The note was meant for you, slipped under Madame Volkov's door by mistake in Clara's haste. You knew the train's design from prior journeys, including the hidden panel. You entered through Monsieur Marlowe's compartment, stabbed Madame Grayson with a blade you later discarded, and planted the brooch in his suitcase to frame him. Evelyn's composure cracked, her voice rising. This is nonsense. I repaid her. I had no reason, Poirot cut her off, his voice like steel. You had every reason, mademoiselle. Your pride, your family's honor were at stake. Clara's demand for repayment would have ruined you. You saw her at dinner, nervous, touching her brooch, a reminder of her wealth, your debt. You acted, swift and silent, using the panel to enter, kill, and escape, locking the door behind you. Sir Basil gripped his sister's arm, his face ashen. Evelyn, tell him he's wrong. But Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. She was going to ruin me, Basil. She demanded the money, said she'd tell everyone. I couldn't. Let her destroy us. The dining car fell silent, the passengers frozen, their eyes on Evelyn. Poirot signaled to Fournier, who stood ready at the door. Monsieur Fournier summoned the police when we reach Lyon. Mademoiselle Warrender will answer for her crime. As the passengers dispersed, Evelyn sobbing in her brother's arms, Poirot stood by the window, the lights of Lyon now a constellation of justice. The train's secrets had unraveled, and the truth, as always, had emerged under the scrutiny of his little grey cells. Chapter 12. The journey's end. The Riviera Express rolled into the grand station at Lyon, its sapphire carriages gleaming under the arc lights, a stark contrast to the sombre drama that had unfolded within. The platform bustled with the purposeful strides of police officers, their dark uniforms cutting through the evening mist as they boarded the train, summoned by Monsieur Fournier's urgent telegram. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of coal and the distant temps of the Rhine River. Inside the first-class dining car, the passengers sat in stunned silence, the weight of Hercule Poirot's revelation still settling like dust after a storm. Miss Evelyn Warrender, her angular face pale and tear-streaked, sat beside her brother, Sir Basil, whose military stoicism had crumbled into a mask of disbelief. The other passengers, Madame Irina Volkov, Harold Grayson, Madame Giselle Dubois, and John Marlowe watched with a mix of relief and unease. Their secrets laid bare, but their roles in the tragedy now clarified. Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small frame radiating quiet triumph, his green eyes reflecting the chandelier's glow. His moustache twitched as he murmured, "The journey ends, but the truth, it endures." Hercule Poirot has seen too. It, the police, led by a stern-faced inspector named Monsieur Lefebvre, entered with Fournier, their boots echoing on the polished floor. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Monsieur l'inspecteur," he said, bowing slightly, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I have resolved the murder of Madame Clara Grayson. The culprit is Mademoiselle Evelyn Warrender, who killed to protect her family's honor from financial ruin." Lefebvre, a man of sharp features and sharper skepticism, raised an eyebrow. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you, but I require details. What evidence supports this accusation?" Poirot's smile was serene, his hands folded over his cane. "The evidence, monsieur, is in the details, as always. Madame Grayson was stabbed in a locked compartment, the door secure, the window scratched. But unopened a misdirection, a hidden panel connecting her compartment to number 8, Monsieur Marlowe's, allowed the killer's entry and exit. The diamond brooch, reported missing, was planted in Monsieur Marlowe's suitcase to frame him. A note found in Madame Volkov's compartment read, "Meet me tonight. We must settle this. CG, it was meant for Mademoiselle Warrender slipped under the wrong door in haste." He turned to Evelyn, whose hands trembled in her lap. "Mademoiselle Warrender borrowed money from Madame Grayson to save her family's estate, a debt she could not repay. When Madame Grayson threatened to expose her ruin, Mademoiselle acted. She knew the train's design from prior journeys, including the hidden panel. She entered through Monsieur Marlowe's compartment, stabbed Madame Grayson with a blade now discarded, and planted the brooch to divert suspicion. Her motive was pride, her method cunning." Evelyn's voice broke, a sob escaping. "I had no choice. She would have destroyed us. Basil name, our legacy." Sir Basil, his face ashen, gripped her shoulder, his silence a heavy acknowledgement of her guilt. Lefebvre nodded, his skepticism softening. "And the proof of this panel, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot gestured to Fournier, who produced a small tool, and pried open the panel in Clara's compartment, revealing a narrow passage to Marlowe's. The passengers gasped, and Marlowe's eyes widened, though he remained silent. "The panel," Poirot said, "was the key. Only someone familiar with the train could have known it." Lefebvre signaled to his officers, who gently but firmly took Evelyn into custody. She rose, her head bowed, as Sir Basil protested weakly. "She's my sister, Poirot. Surely there's another way." Poirot's gaze was kind but resolute. "Justice, Sir Basil, is the only way." Madame Grayson deserved no less. As the police escorted Evelyn away, the passengers dispersed, their faces etched with the strain of the ordeal. Irina Volkov clutched her pearls, her relief tinged with lingering fear. Grayson slumped, his grief now mixed with clarity. Dubois closed her notebook, her flair for drama subdued. Marlowe slipped away, his silence unbroken but his role as observer confirmed. Poirot retired to the dining car, where a waiter brought him a tisane, its delicate steam curling in the air. He sipped it slowly, the scent of chamomile grounding him as he reflected on the case. The Riviera Express, with its elegance and its secrets, had been a stage for human passions, greed, pride, fear, and desperation. The brooch, the note, the panel, the scandal. The Detzel had pointed to Evelyn Warrender, whose calculated act had unraveled under the scrutiny of his little grey cells. Outside, the Mediterranean sparkled faintly, its promise of beauty indifferent to the tragedy. Poirot adjusted his moustache, his mind already turning to the next journey, the next mystery. "The human heart," he murmured, "it is a labyrinth, but the truth, it always finds its way. Hercule Poirot ensures it." As the train prepared To depart Lyon, its whistle a mournful cry, Poirot stepped onto the platform, his Homburg hat tilted just so. The Riviera Express would continue to Nice, but for Poirot, the journey's end was here. In the triumph of justice over deception, the end.